And we get really interesting candidates because when you say you can't win, you also can't screw it up. So you can try new things, you can be authentically yourself, you can just say what you think. And you're not getting pressure from your state party or from consultants or donors, because you don't have any of those, to say things in a very particular way. And so I think it's an interesting on-ramp too for people who want to help and kind of be superheroes for democracy or super volunteers for democracy.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Fox Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Kate Compton Barr, who you heard up top. She's the founder of an inventive North Carolina project called the Can't Win Victory Fund, which recruits candidates to run in districts where they know they will lose. The point is to raise awareness of the way partisan gerrymandering takes power and representation away from voters, and to push for fair, nonpartisan district maps. Barr and her associates are approaching the challenge with the combination of playful bluntness and social media savvy. That conversation is coming up, and in our arts and culture segment, with Hanukkah taking place this week, we'll take a look at a historic Jewish congregation and synagogue in Charleston, South Carolina, the home of Reform Judaism in the United States. But first, it's time for the weekly news roundup. This week, we're tracking the ongoing conservative makeover of public education across the South. As usual, you can find links with more information in the show notes. We'll start in Florida, where an auditor's report found widespread problems and confusion in the management of the state's rapidly expanding school voucher programs. A headline in the Washington Post summarized the report this way: How Florida Lost Track of 30,000 Students, a Cautionary Tale for Vouchers. Florida has the country's largest voucher system, which last year enrolled nearly 500,000 students. It is set up to run through independent scholarship funding organizations, which receive money from the state and disperse it to families to use for either private school tuition or homeschooling expenses. There are two of those organizations that handle most of the K-12 vouchers. The state auditor's report found that because of failing to keep track of who was actually enrolled where, the state had overpaid by between $60 million and $110 million for students who were, in fact, still in public schools. The confusion seems to stem from the complex way Florida set up its funding for the vouchers and from the program's rapid growth. After the state removed income limits on eligibility, enrollment leapt from about 267,000 students in the 2022-23 school year to 497,000 last year. They received a combined $4 billion in funding. The report says that there was more student mobility than expected, meaning students were moving in and out of the program more often than the system was able to keep track of, so that some payments were sent to the funding organizations for students who had already returned to public schools. As the Washington Post put it, quote, "On any given day, Florida's education department did not know where 30,000 students were going to school and could not account for the $270 million in taxpayer funds it took to support them." In a response letter, the State Department of Education acknowledged the problems and said it was taking steps to address them, but mostly framed it as a challenge brought about by the program's popularity. The letter said, quote, "It is important to note that no state has administered a school choice or scholarship program as large as Florida's." But the voucher program's many detractors saw the report as confirmation of their misgivings, and as a sign of what could be coming to other states, many in the South, that have followed Florida's lead in creating statewide voucher programs open to all. Kabila Huddleston of the left-leaning think tank Ed Trust told the Post, quote, "For the states that have recently universalized, like Texas and Tennessee and other states that could soon see vouchers as a result of the federal program, they need to view Florida as a cautionary tale of what happened." On to Alabama, where the effects of the Trump administration's war on what it calls DEI continue to resonate, in predictable and honestly probably intended ways. The University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa announced earlier this month that it was suspending publication of two student magazines, one called 1956, which focuses on black student life and culture, and one called Alice, which is aimed at female students and writes about lifestyle and fashion. Administrators said that continuing to fund the student-run periodicals could run afoul of guidance issued by U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi in response to executive orders issued by Trump and guidance from his Department of Education banning any and all efforts to promote diversity and inclusion in schools. Now, it's worth noting that those executive orders and that guidance do not have the full force of law and have also been blocked in multiple court challenges. But many schools across the country have sought to comply anyway, not only for fear of losing federal funding, but in red states like Alabama, for fear of angering their conservative-dominated state governments. In fact, because of an Alabama state law passed in 2024, also aimed at restricting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, the university had already shuttered campus spaces that had been provided for the Black Student Union and LGBTQ students. Alabama students involved with the two magazines expressed disappointment and dismay at losing funding. 1956, the magazine for Black students, is only 5 years old. It was created in 2020 during the surge of Black Lives Matter activism after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Its founder, Tiana Tate, said in a statement to the Alabama Reflector that, quote, "I am beyond disappointed in the regression UA has made since I created 1956 magazine." The very title of the magazine is a reference to Alabama's long history of state-sponsored racism. It refers to the year that the first Black student, Autherine Lucy Foster, was allowed to enroll at the university. She was on campus for just 3 days before she was expelled by the all-white Board of Trustees. Alice, the women's magazine, was created in 2015. In a statement on its website, its editor-in-chief, Gabriel Gunter, said, "The Alice team is incredibly disappointed at the suspension of such important publications. Alice has always been a space for everyone and has never excluded anyone based on their identity. We pride ourselves on fostering an inclusive environment where all creative voices can flourish." Unfortunately, as was the case in 1956, inclusive environments are out right now in Alabama. But there is something of a happy ending to the story, or at least a viable next chapter. A group of Alabama graduates who call themselves Masthead, an acronym for Media Alumni Seeking to Highlight Equity and Diversity, launched an effort to raise $25,000 to enable both of them to publish in the spring semester. As of last week, they had already surpassed the goal, raising nearly $26,000. It is unclear if the magazines will be able to continue publishing under their current names or will need to make changes. And of course, raising $25,000 every semester may be a heavy lift. But it seems that the student journalists will be able to continue their work, at least for now. Finally, we'll touch down in Texas, where, as the New York Times noted last week, the state's flagship university is being forcefully remolded by its conservative power structure. The new president of the University of Texas at Austin is Jim Davis, an attorney who was appointed this summer by the school's Board of Regents. Although he had been the university's legal counsel and chief operating officer, he has no academic background or teaching experience. What he does have are strong Republican credentials. His first job out of law school was working for then Texas Supreme Court Justice Alberto Gonzales, who went on to serve as U.S. Attorney General under President George W. Bush. Before coming to work at the university, Davis worked for 4 years as a deputy attorney general under controversial and very conservative Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. He is the first non-academic to lead the university in a century. Davis is looking at combining or eliminating several liberal arts departments. He is supported by an equally conservative Board of Regents who, among other things last month, voted to give themselves veto power to cancel any course on the curriculum they don't like. Like other states across the South, Texas has passed laws in recent years placing vague but menacing restrictions on discussions of race and gender and other topics regarded as divisive. The transformation is especially notable because UT Austin has long had a reputation as one of the most culturally vibrant and politically liberal major campuses in the South. Some professors and students in Austin told the Times that there is now a chill on campus, with many unsure what they can talk about in classrooms without bringing down administrative wrath. One student, Ryan Lowe, told the Times, quote, "They don't consider questioning how women are treated in society. They don't consider questioning how African American people are treated in society. They see those as questions that don't need to be asked." One other quick note, just following up on last week's discussion of recent elections in the South. There were two more interesting races decided last week. In Miami, Eileen Higgins became the first Democrat elected mayor since 1998, and the first woman ever. She beat Republican candidate Emilio Gonzalez, who had been endorsed by President Trump, by 19 points. Higgins has championed issues including affordable housing, sustainability, and improved public transit. She has also promised to unwind the close relationship between the Miami Police Department and federal immigration enforcement agencies. The Miami mayor is technically a part-time job and does not directly oversee the operations of city government. That's done by a city manager who is appointed by the mayor but operates with some degree of autonomy. But whatever the limitations of the office, the election says a lot about the mood of the city's predominantly Latino population heading into 2026. Also, in Georgia, a Democratic candidate flipped a state house seat in a district near Athens. Eric Geisler narrowly defeated Republican Mac Dutch Guest, winning by 197 votes in a district that had been drawn to tilt toward the GOP. Like other successful Democratic candidates in recent months, Geisler campaigned on bread-and-butter issues including the high cost of living and access to health care. All of these off-year elections have their peculiarities, of course, and don't necessarily predict results for the coming year. But they certainly suggest a looming dissatisfaction with the status quo, even and maybe especially in the South. Okay, now we're to my interview with Kate Compton Barr. She was born and grew up in Durham, North Carolina, and earned both a bachelor's degree in biology and a master's degree in public health from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She still lives in North Carolina and has worked as a senior behavioral scientist at the University of Michigan's Center for Academic Innovation. She's also an entrepreneur, founding a newborn baby supply company called Pip and Grow, and is herself mother of 2 children. And now she's a political candidate and an activist with an unusual twist. Barr and some colleagues have formed what they call the Can't Win Victory Fund, encouraging progressive candidates to run for seats in gerrymandered North Carolina districts that they have extremely slim chances of winning. Their goal is not to flip the districts, but to redraw them by raising public awareness and outrage about the impact of the way the state's political maps are drawn. Barr is also the founder of the related Fair Maps Fight Club, which advocates for drawing districts that are truly representative of a state's population. She ran for office herself in 2024 as a Democrat for North Carolina's State Senate District 37, losing to the Republican incumbent by a 65-35 margin. Now she's running as a Republican, yes, a Republican, for Congressional District 14. We had a really good conversation talking about all of that and more. So, Seth, let's go to the tape. So, Kate Compton Barr, thanks so much for joining me.
Hi, Jesse. Thank you for having me.
So I have a lot of things I want to ask you about, but to start off with, can you just tell me a little bit about your background? I know you're born and grew up in North Carolina. What was your educational background? And then also, at what point did your political consciousness start to come together there in North Carolina? And what was it that prompted that and kind of put you on the path to where you are now?
Yeah, so I'm from Durham, North Carolina, and went to UNC Chapel Hill twice, first for my undergrad in biology and Spanish, and then I went back and got my master's in public health there. Go Tar Heels. I'm a product of North Carolina's public school system, and my mom was a public school teacher, and that's really where my political awareness began. My mom was one of the first white teachers at an all-black high school in the state, Hillside High School, and she has been, frankly, like an activist for my whole life. She has been working to try to have like equality and fairness and representative democracy for as long as I can remember. So that was like the example I had growing up. My very first political activity was during the first Gulf War. I was really upset about the embargo for Iraq. I was worried about kids not having milk. I think I was maybe 7 years old, maybe 8. And so like my understanding of how all of that worked was, let's call it limited. But I wrote to President Bush and let him know that I didn't like the idea of hungry kids. And it turns out, even as a 43-year-old now, I still don't like the idea of hungry kids.
Right. Still a battle we're fighting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've had, an interesting career. You've been an entrepreneur. You work as a behavioral scientist. It's kind of a leap from there to deciding, first of all, to run for office, which is hard work, as anyone who's done it knows. Mm-hmm. What pushed you in that direction?
Yeah. So I don't know if people remember 538. It was Nate Silver's podcast and website network back in the 2010s.
Right, the one we all consulted every day to see where the polls were going.
Exactly. There was a reporter named Galen Druk who did a series on gerrymandering. I want to say it was around 2016, 2017. I might have that date wrong. Sorry, Galen. But it had to do with what was happening in Wisconsin and their battle with the Supreme Court to try to have fair maps. And it was the first time I had really dug in on the impact of gerrymandering on our democracy and how it touches our everyday lives. Literally everything a person cares about is impacted by how our voting maps are drawn. And so I had that in the back of my mind. I was super disappointed when the Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice Roberts, decided not to weigh in on partisan gerrymandering and to kick it back to the states, and didn't really know what to do about it for a while. Then in North Carolina in 2022, our state Supreme Court was actually democratically controlled. And they heard a partisan gerrymandering case and declared partisan gerrymandering to be unconstitutional. And so I thought, sweet, my state is home free. That election, we sent 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans to the U.S. House, which is exactly right for a purple state like North Carolina, as it should be. But the other thing that happened in 2022 is control of our state Supreme Court flipped from Democratic control to conservative control. And they immediately reheard that partisan gerrymandering case and essentially said that partisan gerrymandering was a political question, not a judicial question, and therefore it was allowable under our state constitution, which meant we got these fresh, terrible maps in 2023. For reference, those maps sent 10 Republicans and 4 Democrats to Congress. It's not like North Carolina changed. That's just the impact of drawing a different map. And that margin is exactly the amount that the Republicans control the House by. So if North Carolina had not been gerrymandered, control of the House would be in the hands of the Democrats today. Mm-hmm. But my decision to run happened when those new maps came out after that state Supreme Court ruling. And my state senator, Natasha Marcus, was drawn into a super red district. And she was drawn into that district, in my opinion, because she was too loud and too female in her role as state senator. So they drew her into a district she could not win. And it made me really mad. And I happened to be standing in line for a glass of wine at a Christmas festival in town, which is a weak moment for anyone, I just want to say. And a friend jokingly asked me if I wanted to run in an unwinnable state Senate district. And I kind of couldn't let go of the idea. It was the intersection of my academic career, studying how people take in information and studying persuasive communication, mixed with my politically active heart. And I thought, what if we actually told the truth about what was happening here, and I just ran as a loser, because that is the outcome, and we use this as a way to raise awareness about our voting maps. It took me a couple of days to really decide to do it, but I just couldn't let go of the idea, and sometimes when it's like that, you just have to jump.
I feel like the way a lot of our districts are drawn now, it forces people in the minority, in the opposition party, it can force them into a position of a little bit of dishonesty, because when they come out to announce their campaign, reporters will ask them, well, you can't win, and they'll say, oh, well, I feel like this district is right, it's right there, it's right about to switch, and everybody kind of knows that's not going to happen. But so it was your thought to kind of short circuit that by just acknowledging up front what everybody could kind of plainly see, right?
Yeah, It's really twofold. So first of all, if you live in a gerrymandered district, you know that the candidate from the other party isn't going to win because you live in that district. You live it every day. And so when somebody shows up and they're like, I am the candidate alone who can fix it, I am the sole person who can flip this district, that person just sounds like a jackass, honestly. Mm-hmm. And that's not the kind of relationship we're trying to build with voters. So there's that element to it where I think communicating to voters that we can run for office honestly is incredibly important right now. The second piece of it is a little bit of a persuasive communication strategy. If you knock on someone's door or meet them at a farmer's market or in church or whatever, and you say, hi, I am Kate Barr. I'm your losing candidate for North Carolina Senate District 37. I can't win because our voting maps have been drawn to make sure that no Democrat can win here. If you think democracy should have competition, let me talk to you about State Supreme Court Justice Anita Earls. And what happens as soon as you tell someone that you can't win and you're not standing there to try to convince them to vote for you, you've taken the transactional element out of that conversation. And they will trust you differently, they will hear you in a different way, and you can have a more honest conversation than most politicians get to have, frankly, because voters are really used to politicians trying to get something from them. And as soon as they discover that, like, I'm not trying to get a thing from them, I'm doing it because I think it is important that voters have choice, you have, like, alignment. And from that alignment and common ground, you can have other really important conversations about how we get fair maps. That, in turn, we discovered with my race, will help lift voter turnout. The red county in my district, the bulk of my district, is a county called Iredell County, is actually one of only 8 counties in North Carolina that got bluer in 2024. So we had been afraid that this campaign, you say can't win, like why would people show up to vote? Well, it turns out when you show up for them, they show up for you. And so we really saw that these types of campaigns are a way to reach folks who have been left behind. And that's really where Can't Win Victory Fund came from. I had planned to just go back to my day job as a behavioral scientist after my ass kicking. But when it worked, we were like, well, shoot, we need to do this everywhere, see if it keeps working.
And so what does that look like? I mean, obviously we're gearing up for a big election year next year. And so are you seeing people come out wanting to run in some of the places that you want to put people on the ballot?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a royal we. This was not me. I am a member of a team of 6, most of whom are volunteers or very close to it at this point. And the team has spent all day, most days, talking to folks who want to run for office in state legislative districts, either in North Carolina or, honestly, we've heard from folks in Ohio and Texas and Illinois, Oregon, South Carolina, Georgia, I'm trying to remember, Louisiana. There are a bunch of people who are attracted to running for office this way because they can run honestly. And we get really interesting candidates because when you say you can't win, you also can't screw it up. So you can try new things, you can be authentically yourself, you can just say what you think. And you're not getting pressure from your state party or from consultants or donors, because you don't have any of those, to say things in a very particular way. And so I think it's an interesting on-ramp, too, for people who want to help and kind of be superheroes for democracy or super volunteers for democracy. So we also had a TikTok video about candidate recruitment go viral, and ended up with several hundred folks raising their hands to run coming out of that. And we're still sorting through those folks and figuring out who lives where and who's registered how and what it takes for them to run for office. But I think we'll have a really strong showing in 26.
And what are you looking to provide for those candidates? I mean, you are raising funds, trying to, but obviously I'm sure you can't just, underwrite hundreds of campaigns all over the place. So what are you, how do you work with those candidates? What do you provide to them?
Yeah, so what we want to do is make it as easy for them as possible. So we provide help with branding, websites. We do multiple trainings. Like we will have, hopefully in March, a candidate, we call them candidates because we like to be cute, candidate training where they can come and learn some of the pieces of running a can't win campaign that aren't really the same as running in a super competitive district. So our candidates need to be great at social media. They need to have websites that are clear and easy to understand. They need to know how to connect fair maps back to basically any issue a voter might be concerned about. And it needs to be a visually impactful campaign. So things like headshots and like I said, branding, but logos and yard signs and merch, all of that kind of stuff can come as a package from us. We have to be very careful because we're a 501c4 about compliance laws. So we are also going to start an independent expenditures pack in the new year, which is where a lot of that actual funding will come from. Because our C4 can't just give directly to the candidates. But What we're doing right now, the funding we're raising right now, is to recruit the candidates, support them through filing, and get this training going.
And as you said, I mean, you are primarily focused in North Carolina, but you mentioned getting interest from other places, mm-hmm. and that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because clearly it's an idea that can kind of work all over the country. And so how are you, for yourselves, trying to keep that, at a level that you can manage? Because obviously, like you say, you're a relatively small operation.
Yeah, I mean, our reach is fully determined by our budget. I think that's like the reality for most organizations, no matter whether it's politically oriented or not. So right now, our budget lets us work in North Carolina, and we're looking for good partners in other states who can support candidates in those places. If we magically get funding that lets us work in other states, we absolutely will, because I do think this is an idea that translates to other people. And who knew that gerrymandering would be like the hot topic of 2025 and an interesting issue to be talking about, but here we are.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about that too, because you were already doing this, but then because of the Texas redistricting and everything that has come afterward, including yet another redistricting in North Carolina, where they're going to take away another one of those seats, right?
Yeah.
Now it really is top of mind. It's been headlines everywhere, and we have yet another pending Supreme Court case that could affect this maybe badly in the near future. So I guess, are you finding that because of all of that, people are like this, your message resonates more with people just because it's something that they are hearing kind of everywhere?
I think so. I mean, I'm having to define gerrymandering less often than I did when I first started the campaign in 2023. I would love to tell you that I foresaw all of this unfolding and that it was all a giant strategy. It's actually, I really thought we were on a path towards fair maps in more places coming into 24 and into the beginning of 2025. So while it feels like a real backslide in the fair map movement right now, I think what it will turn into, if I were to predict the future, which is dangerous, I think it will turn into greater voter awareness of how much our voting maps matter. And we have a real opportunity to essentially create a political cost for silencing voter voices.
So philosophically, can you make your best case to me for why fair maps matter? Like in a representative democracy, which is more or less the system that we have, like the Supreme Court has said, we don't really care about this, and state Supreme Courts have kind of been all over the map on it, depending on what state constitutions say. Why should we, as just residents, voters of the United States, why is this important to us?
In a representative democracy, the goal is to elect leaders that then take their constituents' needs to either the U.S. House or to the state legislature and then advocate for those voters. So theoretically, the person that wins the election in my, let's call it state Senate district, should care about what her voters want, because we could fire her if she doesn't care about us, if she doesn't advocate for us, if she doesn't help make the changes that we say that we need to see. So really, voters are supposed to be in charge. What happens when the maps are drawn this way is that the politicians pick their voters instead of voters picking their politicians. And that means that the politicians don't care what their voters need. Politicians care what their map makers need and what their donors need. And that's kind of it. And so you lose that representative piece of democracy. Like, yes, technically we are all casting ballots, but we have also all been trained to vote based on R's and D's. And we see people just like behaving very consistently that way. And the map makers and the politicians in power take advantage of that, and they do it in both parties. We definitely exist in a system that is propping up, frankly, corrupt and complacent politicians on both sides of the aisle. And the people who have come to power that way aren't very interested in changing those rules. And so the longer they sit there and the more gerrymandering happens, the harder it becomes to kick them out and get our representative democracy.
So what is the answer to this? I mean, it's not going to come, as we have seen from the U.S. Supreme Court, obviously, and maybe there would be answers at the congressional level, although those could also then be subject to Supreme Court challenge themselves. So how do we actually fix this at the state level?
Yeah, so there are kind of two paths, and we're working on both. And by we, I mean me personally on one path, and then the Can't Win Victory Fund on another path. So Can't Win Victory Fund and our 501c3, the Fair Map Fight Club, are advocating for a flipped state Supreme Court in North Carolina. Our path to fair maps here runs through our state Supreme Court. We basically need to return to Democratic control. The earliest we can do that is 2028. Folks need to vote for Justice Anita Earls to be reelected in 2026, and then we need at least 2, but hopefully 3 Democratic justices to be elected in 2028. If we do that, then we get fair maps, because we have seen that a democratically controlled state Supreme Court will rule that our state constitution says partisan gerrymandering is unconstitutional. So that's like just North Carolina. However, we've seen that this is a problem nationwide, and every state has a slightly different path towards getting fair maps. The goal for all of them, to be clear, is to have an independent commission run by citizens. So think of it like jury duty for map making. And the fastest way to get that is through federal fair map legislation. We, of course, have the problem that the people in the U.S. House, about 83% of them, are sitting there because they are in a non-competitive district. And the way that I have at least chosen to work on that is to run in the Republican primary against my Republican congressman, because the general election is decided by the map makers. The primary election is where the real fight is. That's where representation is actually chosen. And I think that these leaders need to start being afraid of primary opponents who are going to hold their map-making behaviors against them. So we've got kind of 2 paths running. One's a little bit slower and state level, but also less likely to be challenged at the Supreme Court. The other is a little more, we'll call it innovative, for lack of a better word, where we are trying to make these politicians be just as afraid of a primary opponent from the other side as they are from a primary opponent to the extreme of their party.
Yeah, and so to wrap up, I wanted to ask you about the race you are running now, that primary. I guess, first of all, what reaction have you gotten from Republicans? Because you did just run as a Democrat in 2024. Are people saying, well, you can't, like, you're not a Republican, you can't run in the Republican primary? What are you hearing from people about that?
So far, the Republicans haven't said too much about it. They may be hoping that I just fade into the background and go away. If they hope that, then they have not looked very far into my work. I think they don't quite know what to do with me because I have followed all of the laws of our state about how to run as a Republican. I've been a Republican since May. I voted in this last election as a Republican. But it is true that I am a real-life rhino, which is Republican in name only. I am not trying to pretend to suddenly have MAGA values. I'm still the same person I have always been. And we'll see what the voters make of that. The way that it works in North Carolina is that if you're registered to a party, like Democrat or Republican, you have to vote on that party's primary ballot. But if you're registered unaffiliated, you can choose which party's ballot you want to vote on. And about 38% of my district, the majority of the voters in my district, are registered unaffiliated. And so those are the folks I'm really talking to and hoping that they will pull a Republican ballot and choose to vote for me instead of the incumbent. It's certainly possible for Democrats to change their voter registration up until February 6th, I believe. They do it at the Board of Elections or on the DMV website. And that's great. But the real point here is that we need change in D.C., and I kind of don't care what letter I have to put next to my name to go make that happen.
And also, obviously, that because the system being set up the way it is, the only actual competitive election in that district is the Republican primary, because the general election is kind of a show election. Yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting how we kind of make fun of other non-democratic authoritarian countries, Saddam Hussein getting 99% of the vote and everything. But in reality, a lot of our own general elections are not much
right. We're not much better in a lot of ways in some of these districts. Yeah. And I think after Tuesday's election, the 2025 results, people were really hopeful that Democrats could get elected just as Democrats in some of these districts. And I really hope that that's true. It is my opinion, and I think, just being realistic, I don't really want to, put all my chips in the hope basket. So my preferred outcome is me versus the Democrat on the November ballot. That feels like the safest possible option for making the kinds of changes that we need to make.
Right. All right. Well, if people want information, where should they go?
They can find me at katebarcanwin.com. And the Can't Win Victory Fund is can'twinvictoryfund.com. Also, same for all the social media places except for X because it's toxic.
Amen to that. And if there's somebody in another state that might be interested in learning from this and setting something up, they can contact you as well, I suppose.
Absolutely. Please email us. There's contact information on the Can't Win Victory Fund website. If you're interested in supporting a Republican and really burnishing your bipartisan bona fides, then please, we are welcoming campaign donations. This one is going to be an expensive race.
All right. Well, Kate Barr, thanks so much for talking with me. Really, really appreciate it. And really innovative work going on there.
Thanks, Jesse.
Hanukkah started last night, December 14th. The 8-day Jewish Festival of Lights runs through next Monday, December 22nd. So it's a good time to highlight one of the more notable and storied congregations in the South. You may not think of South Carolina as much of a center of Jewish culture. The state has a small Jewish population, less than 1% of its residents, but they've been there a long time. Charleston may be best known for its stately historic homes, its fine dining, and its central historic role in the American slave economy. But it's also home to Kahal Kadosh Beth Elohim, which occupies the second oldest synagogue building in the country and the oldest in continuous use. An influx of Jewish migrants began arriving in Charleston around the start of the 1700s, predominantly Sephardi Jews from London and the Netherlands. By 1749, the community had grown large enough to form a congregation. They didn't have a synagogue building to meet in until they built a large house of worship in 1794. At the time, it was known as the grandest synagogue in the country. Sadly, it burned in the Great Charleston Fire of 1838. The current Greek Revival-style building was dedicated in 1840. The congregation's historical significance isn't only architectural. It is the home of Reform Judaism in the United States. The Reform movement began in 1824, when 47 younger members of the synagogue petitioned for changes in rituals and prayers. They wanted to abridge some of the services and conduct prayers and sermons in English rather than Hebrew. They were rebuffed at first, but by the time the new synagogue opened in 1840, it did so with a new liberalized ritual. Although Reformism spread elsewhere in the U.S. primarily through the immigration of German Jews already committed to it, Beth Elohim retained its prominence in the movement. It was one of the founding synagogues of the Union of American Hebrew Congregations in 1873, which later evolved into the current Union for Reformed Judaism. The synagogue is open for public tours most days of the week. You can check its website, linked in our show notes, for more information. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. If you do feel moved to make a donation, thank you. Thanks to Bark for our theme music and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave us a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. You can also write me at jmashark@theprogressivesouth.org.